Good afternoon to all, and happy International Museum Day. With the theme Museums for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion, ICOM asks us to consider on this so peculiar International Museum Day 2020, the diversity of perspectives that make up the communities and personnel of museums, and champion tools for identifying and overcoming bias in what they display and the stories they tell. ICOM refers to the diversity of perspectives that make up the communities and personnel of museums as an existing fact. In my view, it's not the case for the majority of museums around the world. We know from experience that most museums propose activities every year on this day, independent of the theme. It doesn't really matter what the theme is. This year, some associated the word inclusion to people with disabilities, which might be a step forward, but again, it's not all. An inclusion policy is not about remembering some people on special occasions once or twice a year. In a conference in January, Madani Yunis, who's a British cultural programmer, told us, generosity is not justice and inclusion is not equality. And these words still resonate with me. So before presenting our guests, I would like to say a few words about our host, the Calouste Gulbenkian Museum, and the program they proposed to us for this day. The Curator for a Day virtual exhibition, where out of approximately 400 proposals, the museum chose 50 works accompanied by labels written by the people who chose and proposed them. The conversation that took place this morning with members of the Muslim community here in Lisbon under the title, How Many Voices Does a Museum Have? And with which conversation will remain available on the Foundation's YouTube channel, or the short videos on Instagram with some of the professionals that help guarantee the daily functioning of the museum and deal directly with the artwork in so many diverse ways. These are just some of the things our colleagues from the Calouste Gulbenkian Museum have come up with in their months-long reflection and practice on what diversity is and what makes a museum inclusive. Today, as I mentioned before, it is a peculiar International Museum Day. People and organizations around the world are facing a situation they could have never imagined, although perhaps they should have, a situation that goes beyond all challenges lived so far. Their doors closed, without visitors, many museums had to rethink their role and relationship with the outside world. As expected, some have been doing it better than others, although they all share the feeling of uncertainty regarding the near future and beyond. It's always good to be able to be together, even virtually, and discuss our concerns and thoughts with other colleagues. The coronavirus has created this paradox of being apart and at the same time closer than ever, just like we are here today. Regarding our guests, I would like to inform you first that unfortunately Katarina Pierre will not be able to join us. A close friend passed away this morning and she informed us that she won't be able to join us. Thus, first of all, I would like to thank Olivier Mellet, Director of Clark Art Institute, who has accepted the invitation to join us on such a short notice. Olivier is the director of Clark Art Institute since 2016. He was also the director of Dallas Museum of Art, and in the past he held a variety of leadership positions at the Musée du Louvre over a period of 17 years. I should say that the first time I heard about Clark Art Institute was back in 2014, when the Institute did something very special and still original at the time, the project You Curate, where they asked the people in the local community to propose an exhibition to the museum, just like the Gulbenkian Museum did with their Curator for a Day exhibition. So that's a beautiful coincidence. Manuel Fontán del Junco is another guest today. He's the Director of Exhibitions and Museums of the Fundación Juan March since 2006. The foundation has a cultural space in Madrid and museums in Cuenca and Majorca. Between 1995 and 2005, Manuel was the director of Instituto Cervantes in 3 European cities, Bremen, Lisbon, and Naples, and he has a PhD in philosophy. Last but not at all least, Penelope Curtis, Director of the Calouste Gulbenkian Museum since 2015, a guest and our host at the same time. Penelope has a master's and PhD on French sculpture after Rodin from the Courtauld Institute of Art. In 2010, she joined Tate Britain as director, where she also oversaw the opening of the new Tate Britain in 2013. So welcome all, and welcome to each one of you following this conversation through Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter. You are welcome to ask questions through the chat on any of those platforms, and technology and the good people behind it will send it all to me. I have asked our guests to make an initial dynamic statement regarding both the International Museum Day theme and the specific situation created by the new coronavirus. We will discuss between us for about an hour, during which you may be sending your questions and comments. Some will be introduced to our discussion when relevant to what is being said, and others will be considered in the half hour after our discussion, so do send them in as they come up. So thank you all, Penelope, Manuel, and Olivier, for being with us today. Penelope, can we start with you, perhaps?
Yes, of course. And thank you, Maria, for being our chair. I think it's a complicated topic because it began with the original theme was museums for equality. And now we have the additional question of the virus. I looked again at the Ecom site and thought about the title, Museums for Equality, diversity and inclusion. And I think one might well ask, how can museums be for equality? In many ways, museums are inherently unequal. Museums are very different, and we're all talking about private foundations and very often private collections. So the Gulbenkian Museum is the collection of one man. If we don't look at the modern collection, if we look at the founder's collection, it's a very particular collection. However, it is a diverse collection. I think we have no problem with the diversity of our collection in the founder's collection. The problem we have, and it's a challenge for us, is the diversity of the audience. And that's what we've been trying to deal with and really making progress with in the last few years. But I suppose, how can museums be proactive for equality? That's the big question. And I think there we really mean equality of access. How can we really promote equality of access? And we know how far we are from doing that. Even in Britain, where I worked for so many years, and even with the Labour government, which made it a condition of funding that there should be a change in demographics, with all the political will, the demographic hardly changed. So it's a really big challenge to promote equality of access. You asked us earlier on, Maria, about preparedness. How prepared were we for a crisis? And I suppose you could say no one was prepared for this crisis. It came upon us very quickly. But I'm certainly aware that Portugal was pretty well prepared in comparison to other countries. And we might immediately look at Britain and America in contrast to Portugal. I was really impressed by how Portugal was ahead of the game in many ways and acted very quickly. On the other hand, you could say that it's quite easy to close a museum. As everyone has said, it's quite easy to close things. It's more difficult to reopen them. However, we have learned things during this 2 months period that we've been closed. And you asked us what we've learned, what we wanted to keep, and what we didn't want to keep. And I think it is worth remembering that it's not a very long time. You can't change a whole mindset or ways of thinking or cultural habits in 2 months. But I think we have brought on scene at least a few new habits, which I think we would like to maintain. I think the curators during this time have actually, in a way, got closer to the collections because they've been visiting regularly to check that everything is okay. So it's almost like in a crisis situation, you actually take more care of the collection than you might do normally. And of course, the collection hasn't been abandoned. People have been checking upon it. And the cleaners have been going in every few days. And you might say it's been well looked after. I think the other good habit that we've developed is that we realize the online communication is really important and that we need to feed it. I've learned this word in Portugal, alimentar. We need to give it food to keep it interesting. And the curators realize that they're really crucial in that they have the information and they need to communicate that information. So that, I think, are two habits that we've maybe started to nurture and have begun to flourish more than previously. In terms of thinking about the crisis, I think that immediately after we closed, our main activities were spent on thinking about the calendar, events and exhibitions. And we've gone through many, many scenarios about what do we cancel, what do we delay, how long do we delay it for? Do we delay it for a few months, for a year, for 2 years? And then, of course, all the budget implications of that. So in the beginning, we tried to make everything possible relatively quickly. And now we're realizing it's going to take 1 year, 2 years or more to catch up. And we have to slow down. We can't program everything that we had planned to program, and certainly not quickly. But I would say that in the short term, Portugal in general, and the museums in particular, have dealt quite well with the crisis, and we've been able to respond in practical terms quite efficiently. In terms of the longer term, it's much more complicated and it's much more unclear for us and for everybody. But the big questions about how we may have learned something in this period that we would like to see continue is very pertinent, and it's very pertinent in this sense in relation to the theme of the Econ Day: equality, diversity and inclusion. I think it's perhaps everyone has been thinking about how museums might become slower and more local. And you might relate that to other cultures like slow food, or the whole initiative in terms of reducing transport, reducing air travel, reducing freight costs. So museums are already, in a way, thinking more slowly and more locally. That is an especial challenge for the Gulbenkian, which traditionally, in its 50-year life, has been very much focused on the international and tourist audience. 60% of our public has been the tourist audience. And we know that will decline substantially for maybe 12, maybe 24 months. And that gives us a chance to work locally. And the Gulbenkian has never been very much of a local museum. It's something that we tried to address more recently. We've been working with our neighbours and with the square kilometre around us. But it's something that we could think about and exploit, I think, in a positive way, much more fully. But if we want to do that, we need to not only be attractive, but also be relevant. And of course, these are the questions for us now. If we're looking at the end of event-based culture for the next year or 2 years, if we're looking at the end of exhibitions which attract too many people too quickly, then what are we going to do? How do we fill the gap? The Gulbenkian is relatively fortunate in comparison to other museums, especially museums which rely so heavily on exhibition tickets, which makes me think of Britain in particular. How do we really start to nourish a culture of regular museum going, not a one-off visit or a once-a-year visit to see a special exhibition? How do we encourage people to come regularly to the museum and grow their knowledge of the collections along with our knowledge? And how do we make that pay? Governments are not going to be in a position to fill the gap. Governments are going to be taxing us more highly in the next few years to cover the gaps. Museums, especially in Britain and America, have developed a model that's very highly based on blockbusters and on sponsorship. And sponsorship wants crowds and headlines. But we need to start to find a way in which we can change the desire for number-based evidence. We're always being asked for KPIs, how many people went to see this exhibition. And we need to work with our trustees, with the press, with the public, to change that way of judging museums, and not to judge museums by the number of people who went to a blockbuster exhibition, but to think instead about how they worked with smaller numbers of people in more meaningful ways. And how we make that pay, I think that's the big challenge. I think we can see that it might be very desirable to work with smaller numbers of people more deeply, and more diverse audiences more deeply. And the Gulbenkian has no problem in that. In terms of our resources, we have a great collection. We have staff who want to do it. We have people, we've experimented with this over the last few years. It can work. But if you need that to pay, then that's another question. The Gulbenkian is in a relatively fortunate situation, as I said already. Other museums are not in that situation. They don't have that comfort, that cushion, almohada, you say here. So I think the big challenge, and I'm not offering any answers here, but if we want to make more meaningful connections with our local communities, how can we make that work economically? How can the old museum model change to a new museum model? I think that's my 5 minutes probably.
Thank you so much, Penelope. I took a note of your reference to the diversity of demographics, also with the experience that British Museum gave us. I took a note also of your reference to perhaps a slow food scheme for us to work, and that reminds me of an American cultural manager, Dan Ragsdale, who some years ago proposed a slow arts movement, and perhaps we can talk a bit more about it further on. And in particular, the challenge for the Gulbenkian Museum to be more of a local museum. So I hope we can explore this further. Manuel, can we hear from you now?
Yes, of course. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much to the Gulbenkian Foundation to have the opportunity to join this conversation with Penelope and with you, Maria, and with Olivier Mellet, and to learn from you. Well, I have accepted the invitation, hoping that I could be a kind of decoy rabbit, as in the hound races, and perhaps I can spread some ideas to the discussion, and perhaps Olivier and Penelope, which are more wise and experienced as myself, could talk about it. Well, as I was preparing my 5-minute statement, the first thing I thought about is, of course, that it is strange to talk during an International Day of Museums devoted to equality, diversity, and inclusion without museums, with our museums closed. The situation is a very serious and strange one. The president of the ICOM, Suay Aksoy, told last Saturday in an interview to a Spanish newspaper that, I quote, "A lot of museums will never open again." She didn't say a lot of museums will close, will never open again in the next months. No, life and careers are on the line, of course. No? Our museums in Palma and in Cuenca close in mid-March, and we hope to open them in mid-June. In Madrid, we closed an exhibition devoted to the Irascibles, the famous group of American abstract expressionists protesting against the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and we closed it a week after its opening, so that the artists on display went from being the irascibles to being the affected ones, then the infected ones, and finally the invisible ones, along in an empty and dark and sad exhibition hall. And this situation, an International Day without museums, an International Day of Museums without museums, has made me think of a work by Manuel Saiz, a Spanish conceptual artist based in London, and as a curator, when I found that an artist has told us better than me the thing I want to communicate, I used to quote it. Saiz wrote an artist book that is a kind of parody of a dictionary or a glossary of terms and formulas invented by him, of course, that refers with a critic point of view mixed with humor to the institution art. I mean, exactly the institution that today is under this crisis and closed and without its public. The book is called True Art Lovers, 100 Key Ideas. And one of these key ideas is what Said calls precisely the International Day Without Art. I'm going to read the text, Said's text, because I think that it explains much better than I do the spirit of the reflections of the thoughts I would like to share today with Penelope, with Olivier, with Maria, and with those who are following us at the moment. I quote, International Day Without Art by Manuel Said. The International Day Without Art is an art project and a celebration that has been staged yearly in 20th of January since 2009. One day a year, artists, curators, institutions, and art aficionados unite to seize all art activity. The intention of the International Day Without Art is to reflect on the character of art, on the participants' own personal relationship with the beloved daily practice, and on the use and abuse the society of the spectacle is inflicting on art. Reflection becomes difficult while one is frenetically producing shows and trying to attract visitors into museums. The International Day Without Art makes its appearance initially as a response to the International Museum Day, the Lange Nacht des Museen, or La Nuit Blanche, events addressed to people who are not interested in art and who must be encouraged to go to museums. The International Day Without Art is dedicated to those who live daily for and in art and who for one day wish to gain some perspective of it. Well, and this is for me, this has been for me the basic opportunity and at the same time the basic challenge and perhaps the only opportunity that this terrible pandemic crisis can mean. I mean, not only that to face the pandemic crisis, we need to reflect. The lesson for me is that we must now reflect on how to shape our institutions from now on so that a pandemic is not necessary in order to reflect about our model, about the model of our museums. Because I think that that should be, we all think that that should be the fundamental characteristic of institutions like ours, which should be inspired by knowledge, critical spirit, and educational mission, and not by the dynamics of desire and the hyperactivity that prevails in show business. There is, in my opinion, a second opportunity and a second challenge of this situation, also in order to the equality and the inclusion on the diversity of our museums. And it is the intensify of what I would call digital curating. Sorry, I know that digital curating is not the same as, I mean, the real curating of artworks for a three-dimensional space in our exhibition halls and museums. And I know that art cannot be passed on to the digital form without losing its aura or its originality, at least. But I am also conscious of, perhaps we should also be conscious that if art can lose its aura in the digital world, it can also gain another auras. I mean, and this opportunity, I mean, this challenge, this pandemic crisis could be a way or an occasion to intensify, to think about what we could call digital curating, what means digital curating, what means to curate in the web where all people are moving on a lot of hours during the day, and not only because we are at home, inside our homes, protecting ourselves from the disease, but in general, because we live in a kind of iconosphere. And there is a third opportunity I want to talk about. And of course, we are now in the middle of the disease. I mean, politicians and, I mean, journalists and a lot of people are talking about this situation, telling us that it is a war. I don't think it is a war, or at least it's not a war against an external enemy. It is a war against something wrong in the system. And this is a simple but useful definition of disease, no? Something that doesn't work inside our organism. No? Maybe this is an opportunity to be more conscious about the essence of our job as museums directors, conservators, museums curators. The essence of our job is curating. And if someone is curating, it is because something is sick, essentially sick or ill. And perhaps we should think about this fundamental idea, which is the main characteristic of our job. I mean, we are here to curate artworks, but we are here also to curate ideas, to curate realities, to curate institutions. And this is something that takes time, that must be very well funded, that must be serious as a hospital in pandemic times are. No? Those are the first ideas, the first challenges and opportunities that I think that we are faced on in these troublesome and complicated days or months of the coronavirus and the pandemic crisis. In our case, in the case of the Fundación Juan March, I mean, we are making difficult decisions, but one of the decisions is that probably we will open our museums and the exhibitions that are now currently on view in Palma and in Cuenca, which are less affected by the pandemic crisis than Madrid is. But we have already decided to stop all our analogical, so to say, material activity until December, and to offer our public a kind of digital platform to intensify the curating of contents and of data that we have been working in the last, I would say, years. This is not something that we want to invent because we cannot offer in the best conditions of experience exhibitions. This is something that we think that could go, should go, must go, perhaps in a parallel way to our main activity, to the curation of artworks at the museums and in exhibitions. That's what I wanted to say for my 5 minutes statement.
Thank you so much, Manuel. I note your concern, just as Penelope's concern, regarding the constant visitor growth that we were asked to serve up to now. So I really hope we can explore this further in our discussion. Then your second challenge regarding digital curating, it made me think of a statement ICOM Portugal did regarding International Museum Day, saying that we shouldn't forget that not everybody has access to digital platforms and digital tools, but at the same time, nobody had access before to museums as physical spaces. And Penelope also touched on this and the lack of diversity in demographics. So yeah, I hope we can explore this further. We agreed that we wouldn't stress Olivier for an initial statement, since he was so kind to accept our invitation on such short notice. But perhaps based on what we heard so far, Olivier, I would read a very short passage from an article I read yesterday by Dan Hicks, which is called, it's a long title, "Before the lockdown, the public was agitating for a revolution in the way museums operate. Will this crisis finally force through change?" And the last paragraph of this article was this: "As the cultural shock of these times sinks in, we must not cling to the failed model of infinite visitor growth, but begin cultural redistribution and degrowth that builds more equitable global futures through art and heritage. a new sense of scale and a new ethos of humanity, resilience, justice, remembrance, equality, restitution, environmentalism, and care were already emerging in the museum sector. These values must now be the building blocks of our collective future. So, Olivier, do you think that museums actually share these values or some of these values and are ready to build on them and make the necessary changes, bring the necessary revolution Dan Hicks is talking about?
Thank you very much, Maria. I think that the museums were willing to change. I think there was a lot of discussion during the last 5-7 years about, again, equality, diversity, inclusion, access, the race for more public. There was a lot of question about that. This crisis forced us to probably pause a little bit and think more in depth. I think we have to look at this as an opportunity, even if it is also a huge challenge. I think that the three institutions that are represented here, the Gulbenkian, the March, the Clark, are, in comparison with other museums, lucky enough to do not rely so much on attendance. And it's creating a responsibility for this institution, which has been until now never put too much on the map. There is not so many institutions like us. We are lucky, but at the same time, it creates a sort of sense of urgency among us to be probably more profound and more responsible and virtuous in many. It seems to be an odd word, but I think this is an important question, because at this moment we are talking about equality in terms of access for the public, for example, but in the US, probably more than in Europe, there is also a question which has been raised very suddenly and abruptly, which is the equality between institutions. There is institutions in this country, I'm talking in the United States, that are really in danger to die. And this is a question which is probably less visible in Europe because of the network of governmental support. This is less visible on a short term. This is one question. I think the other question that we are not talking so much about at this moment is education and the role of education in museum and the change that this crisis will probably trigger. Until now, education was almost entirely based on on-site visit. The new digital era will probably change a lot this aspect of the museum work. Until now, we are answering questions or answering needs in terms of digital curation, digital access, but it's a very short-term answer. But this will have a lot of consequences on the long term, probably on different channel than the one we are using at this moment. I realize also that our relationship with our members, our visitors, or the people that are more members than visitors, I mean, not one-shot visitors, but people that are coming back to our institutions. Until now, we are relying again on on-site visit and on-site event. Because probably I am in a country which is wide, and the Clark is an institution which has long distance relationship because of its nature, and I could go back to the nature of the Clark later. Our relationship with our members or our close friends would be completely different. because now we can do this sort of online discussions that were not existing before. When I can be in contact with people on the West Coast or in the Midwest or in Europe, in England, because we are accountable to them. We were not feeling so accountable. In my opinion, this will change. This immediate relationship, which has been created by the combination of confinement and digital leap, is changing a lot of things. Not now so much. I'm not so fond of, well, I would not say that too much, but I'm not sure that the program that we are delivering at this moment are really so much a change in our attitude, but on the long term, it will change far more than we think. It's not just delivering a speech or a lecture online versus in an auditorium. It will be probably a very different relationship with our public on the long term. But just to go back to what the clock is, it makes probably a little bit of a difference in terms of our questions about ourselves. The clock is not only a museum, but it's also a teaching institution and a research institution. And the combination of the three is making our attitude in front of this crisis probably a little different. We are facing many challenges at the same time, welcoming people that are coming from all over the world in a house, to have no student on site but in their parents' home, and having our public not anymore around us. These are the three same challenges. Yeah. Three different challenges, sorry.
I don't know if you'll agree with me, but as I was listening to you, Olivier, I was thinking that we see a big difference at this moment between organizations that had a clear strategy regarding the digital, because they had already thought about it in its specificities, the kind of challenges and opportunities it would offer, and other organizations that did not seriously consider it in the past are just running after it, and they will eventually have to take it seriously. Penelope is back with us. I was going to say that we had lost contact, but now she's back with us. You're not? We don't hear you. If you want to unmute your microphone. Okay. If I could take us just a step backwards, because you refer to the diversity of demographics. We all talked about the diversity in terms of visitors, the people who come to us. But do you feel we will ever be able to be truly diverse and to attract diverse people if our teams are not diverse enough, if our teams do not reflect the society out there? What do you think?
I think you're right.
That was easy.
Yeah.
Are we working on it, you think? And are there differences, for instance, between the States and Spain or Portugal regarding this issue?
I think it's interesting to see that because we are closed and because we cannot rely anymore on visitors from outside our really nearby community, we are the inequality of the museum is even more visible. In the case of the clock is an island of relative wealth in a big lake of poverty. Because we were counting on people coming from the outside of this lake, from next state or from West Coast or from Europe, we were not really asking ourselves so much what were our dedication to our poor neighbors. I would say poor neighbors is probably not the right term, but
probably the opposite for us. Probably the opposite for us, because we had rather wealthy. coming. And in fact, we live in a very diverse area, which we don't reflect properly, but we could. If those people are there, we just need to find ways of working.
Yeah.
But in the case of the clerk, it is even more visible because in fact the needs are 5 miles away, and there is almost nobody. I mean, we are in an isolated area. I mean, we are not driven by a very populated area around us. The big cities are far away from us. I mean, but in fact, it is even more visible that we are not serving the communities as well as we would like to, or as we would wish.
Mm-hmm.
In our case, I mean, we have a kind of 3 scenarios. In Madrid, we are in a big city, and we used to organize exhibitions about international art, or how to say that? I mean, ideas, and ideas are not necessarily located. And well, it is always difficult to check how do you how the diversity of the public is realizing your or is absorbing your activity. And then we have 2 museums in 2 very different places. I mean, one is in a 40,000 inhabitants little town an hour from Madrid, away from Madrid, and I mean, with a local scene, and the museum attract, of course, international tourists, and international tourists that I mean, it is partially at least interested in culture or in social issues or in that what we can offer. The third place is Palma de Majorca, which is now one of the, how to say that, one of the most afflicted cities by the mass tourism. I mean, and the problem that we have there is how to offer a significant cultural experience to people that, I mean, goes inside the museum because they pass by the street around the museum. How to do this? Well, as I was talking about digital curating contents at the website, one of the reasons for that is that, I mean, if you are curating contents in your website and you are taking care of the languages and the styles and the tone of your content, I mean, you are not more local. I mean, you can be affordable from everywhere in the world. No? I mean, and this is a view or a point of view that you should have in front of your eyes when you begin to organize the collection or to thinking about exhibitions.
Thank you, Manuel. I had read something on the website of the foundation, but I would like to pose the question to the 3 of you. So the foundation was saying that it has no other commitment than the quality of its offerings and the benefit of the communities it serves. So a question for the 3 of you. Do you know which are these communities, which communities you're serving, and perhaps also what is of benefit to them? What do they expect from you? Who would like to be the first? Penelope, perhaps.
Well, I was thinking as Manuel was talking that in a way we're developing 2 different audiences, and one is to develop specialist information for an international professional audience who actually can access us online. And the more information we find out, the more research we do, we can easily let that be known online. And then we might be developing a completely different audience locally, in which the tactile experience in real space, in a safe place, where they can share thoughts which maybe normally they can't share. We talked a lot recently about the museum as a safe haven, because it's relatively risk-free in many ways.
Okay.
Then that's service to the local community. There is a social service in real space. You can see I'm in real space now.
Manuel, Olivier, would you like to add to this?
Olivier, well, I mean, your question, like your first question, is the question. I mean, because the question is, who is your public? No? And public is the most mysterious phenomenon of the world. No? I mean, someone has once defined public as anonymous consumers. I mean, who is the public? No? I mean, we hope we are reaching the community we want to serve. No? And there are in all institutions signals or about the question if you are reaching these communities or not. For me, one very distinctive characteristic of an institution trying to reach its community is the role, the weight of the educational programs. I mean, because this is not a public that comes to you because you are organizing quality activity. I mean, excellent activities or good exhibitions. You have to go there to bring them to the institution and to try to make art or whatever part of its education. And I would say that I will that this is one of the characteristic that speaks about the consciousness about the communities you are serving.
Olivier, would you like to add to this?
My mic is on now. No, I think I was listening to the dog barking, and I think there is something that we probably do not measure very well, is the fact that this crisis has probably changed also the formality of the museum. I mean, I think all of us, or at least me, I would never appear at my office or in a public place without a tie. And it has been a rule since I am a curator. And probably it's a French formal aspect, but it's true, this sort of tiny change, and the fact that we are now in a moment where formality is probably less important, and that will last, in my opinion, is probably changing or giving us an opportunity to be probably more available or less intimidating for a certain number of people. I'm not talking about the directors, but for plenty of aspects of the museum, this crisis is changing the social norm more than we think. And I would say the technology itself is equalizing a lot of this relationship. Even visually on our screen, everybody is on the same level. When I have a discussion with my board, the chairman of the board is also a tiny window among 24 others. In a room, there is a far more visible hierarchy. This is compressing the hierarchy. I'm not saying that it makes things, not that everybody will be equal. It's not about that, but it's changing the paradigm of this relationship with our public. The second thing I would like to say is our relationship with time and chronology, well, time more than chronology. If we are more available through podcast, available program on digital, this is after hours. It is not between 9 and 5. It is anytime, anywhere. I'm not saying that suddenly we will have 10 times more public, but it is changing a lot of things in terms of our relationship with our public. There are no more thinking of something which is linked with a physical. And this is also the reason at the beginning that probably one of the biggest impact will be on education in museum. we know now that school can be done at home. Yeah, it's not perfect. I'm very happy that my children are grown up and I do not have to teach them at home. But at least we can be available for a different sort of public after hours, or 20 miles away or 100 miles away. And this is probably more than curating. It could be that it would be the area where the change will be the most visible. I don't know.
You're bringing up issues that are very relevant also to a question we just got, which I will transmit to you. But before, I would like to make my own statement here, if I may, that one thing we tend to forget now that we are almost obliged, even if we didn't want to before, to prepare material for online sharing, that we forget once again people with disabilities. Most of the material that is going online at this moment does not have subtitles, that does not have interpretation in sign language, does not have audio description. So somehow we're reinforcing the usual exclusion of certain people from before now going online. Now, the question we just got, which is very dear to me as well, so I can't wait to transmit it, was, once more the question arises, is it equality of access only related with money? Does everybody feel welcome, even in a free of charge museum? Who will take this first? Penelope?
Okay, I will take it up, but I also just wanted to come back to what Olivier was saying.
Yeah.
Prompted by the dog. I think in the past, museums have been very schizophrenic, and they've dealt with their different audiences in different ways, with different teams. So they have a team looking after the donors, and a team looking after the people with different kinds of needs, and a team looking after the artists. And they've all been split. And I think if there was one ambition that one might try and achieve post-crisis, it would be to try and join up those audiences, because it's ridiculously divided at the moment. It's like they're all in different, we have to do something, at the same time we have to raise money for acquisitions, and those people don't normally meet. Actually, it would be very interesting for those people. Start to think about that. I saw it at the Gulbenkian, but I saw it much more at the Tate. Completely different teams working for different audiences rather than together. Now, I'm going to hand your question to somebody else now.
Manuel, would you like to tackle that one? Yeah, well, of course, it's not a matter of money, but I would say that money helps. I mean, we are totally free. One of the main ideas at the foundation is that we should try to have at the same time excellent cultural, sorry for the word, products, but open for everybody. I mean, there is no fees in Madrid, Cuenca, and Palma. And this is something that is provided because of the financial architecture of the foundation. We are a very strange case in Spain, because there are not a lot of family-founded foundations with its own endowment. I mean, the money that we have is the money that we have at the beginning of our activities. We are limited, but we don't think, we never think in, I mean, having ideas to make an exhibition, thinking that we should do this because we will have 150,000 visitors. I mean, no? And this gives you the freedom to offer exhibitions that are very well visited, like, I don't know, William Morris, for example, but also an exhibition about sound art in Spain, which will be very interesting, but less attended by the public. I mean, well, that gives you a kind of freedom that other of my friends or colleagues don't have. No? And then you have to make the effort to find this public, especially where they are disabilities that make difficult to even this free access. I mean, no? And this is something that we are now doing. I mean, one part of this kind of intensification of the digital consciousness of the Fundación goes ahead to make the foundation more international. I mean, if we have superb content, but we have it all in Spanish, I mean, we are talking to the Spanish-speaking world, and this is just one part of the world. I mean, and also we are trying to have this, I mean, audio descriptions and text, especially prepared for people with disabilities or which need more help. And we are trying to develop this also in our digital activity.
One of our listeners reminds us of something that is crucial for when people will come back to the physical space. The fact that every touch-on material will be an issue in the next months. Either it is an audio guide or a brochure in Braille or a touch screen, whatever. Have you given it a thought at all? Did you have the time to give it a thought? Because
no, I didn't realize that, but nevertheless, museums are lucky. I mean, most activities are much more physical.
Yeah,
you can go around a museum without touching anything. That's really the basic behavior. So I think we're in a very lucky situation compared to others.
But
I think that your earlier question was, do people feel that they can have equality of access if they don't have to pay? And of course, we know the answer is no, they don't, because many people have never been educated to go to museums and don't feel it's part of their lives. And the question is, do we want them to? Should they? And there are many answers.
Can I turn the question just a bit around and to say that I am a person who was educated to go to museums and to like museums, but many times I go to museums and I feel like they don't want me, definitely, no matter how educated and open and available I am, because I understand nothing of what they're supposedly trying to communicate to me. I'm not an expert on everything. I just have a knowledge on a certain subject, perhaps. And that's a very common feeling to a museum. That doesn't stop me from going, of course, but it probably stops many other people. Mm-hmm. What do you think? I think, Olivier, you wanted to say something.
No, there is, I think money is probably a barrier, but it's not the only one. And I would say that it's not probably the most important one. I'm sorry to say that, because I know that it is sort of a common so that free is easier. It's true, no doubt, but there is plenty of other more popular I would say entertainment that are far more expensive than museum and that are less class used. Well, if you go to sports, tickets, everybody know that. Okay, but it's true that, and to go back to the idea of formality, there is a lot still to do in terms of how we welcome the people. I mean, there is a very different. There is museums that are extremely different in their way to welcome the people, and they do not welcome the same people. In our area, there is two museums that almost at the opposite, the Clark and Masmoka. Masmoka is a contemporary art museum which has been which is embedded in a very working class environment and has been shaped by this environment. And the Clark I am looking with amazement and a lot of interest in how they deal with that, because the Clark was created at a moment where this sort of museum was by nature and without any said disdain. On the contrary, the Clark was saying we want to welcome everyone. What it was done, the way it was presented, the way it was thought, was representing a class, and the Mas MoCA is very different. And it's not about the cost of it, because we charge exactly the same amount of money, and we do not have at all the same public.
Of course.
We try to cross-pollinize, but honestly, there is still a lot to do on, I would say, probably on our side to be better at this. And it's not, again, it's not always a question of money. There is some very wealthy people that are very pleased to go to Mas MoCA, and they are intimidated to come to the club. It's not about, it's not only about that.
Thank you for saying this, Olivier. Yes.
But it's not about. But to finish on the, if I may finish on the touching, the fact that people could be afraid to be in an environment where there is too many things to touch. It's true that museums are not the worst place for that, but we are still trying to improve. Even for the library, for example, we want to have touchless card to allow reader to come without touching anything. Yeah, because it's not only, it's not in my opinion, it's not about the reality of the pandemic. It's more probably about the fact that we do not want to have conflict between people. If people do not have the same attitude about contagion. Some people are not very feared by. There is no fear about this. They do not have too much fear. Others are more fearful, and we need to accommodate the two in the same space. Which is more, it's more about managing different attitude than to be better at being clean or sanitized.
The first studies that I had the chance to look at, coming from the US and the UK, actually indicate that the feeling of safety is very important to people in their decision of going back and how soon they will go back. So that will be quite difficult to handle. We have a specific question regarding prices, which I would like to share with you. But before that, a comment that I think is quite interesting. So Lucia is telling us, thank you for streaming this conversation. The general public also is not used to seeing, let alone interacting with this type of discussion. And I think it's very beneficial for us all to see the kind of thinking that goes into all this and be made part of it somehow. Which I think she brings up an issue that is very much true of how much we involve people in our, not necessarily in being part of the decision making, which is another policy as well that many museums are introducing, but being a bit more open about why we do things the way we do them, how are decisions guided, what are we thinking about, who are we thinking about when we're making certain decisions. So I think it's a nice comment to be made at this point. The concrete question regarding prices is, if you think, because also we had the chances, the association I work for had a chance to see, to have a look at the measures that are being prepared for the reopening of museums, theaters, etc. And there will be a lot of work involved in terms of sanitization and hygiene and quite high costs. Which is one thing for organizations that might have state support or a foundation support, and those who are more independent. Do you think the prices will go up in order to be able, not perhaps in your own museums, but do you think it might be a trend, a tendency to say, okay, we have now more costs to keep our space open, let's put the prices higher? What do you think?
I would prefer that we experience a kind of downsize of the activity. I mean, sometimes I think that we are hyperactive, and perhaps it is better to have less activities in a better environment than to make a big investigation to sanitize, I don't know, blockbusters and a lot of exhibitions each year. That makes less sense for me.
Mm-hmm. What you think, Penelope?
If I have to cut, I would cut in quantity and not in order to save money for the real activities and not simply make the same thing without the more cost because of the hygiene of the sanitation instruments.
Penelope?
I doubt it, because firstly, the ticket price doesn't contribute such a large percentage anyway to the overall running costs. But also, I think that we mostly make our money on people visiting the collections. The exhibitions are an expensive initiative. We almost never make a profit on an exhibition. So it's a loss-leading initiative. I think the question will be, is the museum and the foundation happy to slip into a quieter way of being, which actually would be a cheaper way of being, not to spend large amounts of money on making expensive international exhibitions with loans, and instead try to make sure that a museum is a lively institution working with its own collections, essentially. And I think the problem is that at the moment that works okay economically because of the tourism. But without tourism, then we're reliant on the local population and the local population coming back to us. And that's not been a big tradition in Portugal, to go museum visiting every month, say, or on Saturday afternoons. And also, what should the price level be at that point? Because people might be willing to pay a special price to go to an exhibition, but not to come back to the museum. But that's a mindset shift, as I said already, not just in the public, but also in the people who support the museum, write about the museum, and evaluate cultural life.
Yes. There's a question related to what we're saying, which is quite, it comes up quite often in these conversations we've been having in the last weeks. How about qualitative visitor surveys? We are so used to counting numbers, and we accept it, although we say we don't like it. Before we were counting visitors, and now we are counting how many likes on our Facebook pages. I mean, we're after the numbers all the time. Do you think, does any of you do any qualitative visitor studies? And do you think perhaps now will finally be the moment where this will become, a general trend in our organizations?
Whoa.
Manuel, let's hear you.
Yeah. Well, as I said, we are for free in our museums and exhibitions, and that makes a big difference with other institutions. I mean, when we study, the numbers of attendance for an exhibition or what we expect for an exhibition, we simply do a very simplistic rule. And the point is, how many people can we have in a very concrete moment, so that they, in an exhibition, so that they could have a quality experience of that what we are offering. And if the exhibition is an exhibition with, we don't have a very big space, and if the exhibition is an exhibition with a lot of artworks and documentation and films and everything, perhaps the answer is, okay, if you have more than 500 people as average daily, you are not offering a good experience, because there is too much people to take the exhibition seriously. In others, maybe the average is bigger or shorter. That's the point. So that depending on the days we open the show, we can know if we have been achieving our purpose or not. And it depends also on the how to say that, on the type of exhibition and the place where we offer the exhibition.
Do you do any qualitative evaluation at your museums?
We run qualitative evaluations. We make our best to think about, the social media response, the critique, how many people are coming to our organized, by the foundation, organized tour visits.
Now, I was asking, sorry, I don't know if it was clear, qualitative, in terms of quality, the impact of what you're offering, what kind of impact this has on the people who actually attend. Do you do any studies in that direction?
Well, we analyze when the exhibition is closed. I mean, we make our effort to analyze all the data we have. We are not only quantity data, but also quality data. I mean, we have a
Olivier?
Yes, we do. Well, we do not do quality poll so often. I arrived 4 years ago. We have not done one recently. I mean, to be clear about that. Doesn't mean that we do not ask questions to our visitors on a regular basis, which is usually 2-3 questions, but we are not doing that on a sort of a very organized and scientific way. I mean, in a sort of a data organized questionnaire, and that is something that I would say that we are not so good at that.
I would say that this specific issue of qualitative evaluation is very much related to the dictatorship, I call it, of visitor growth. How do you think we're going to convince our funders or whoever manages us that we should become, like Penelope beautifully said it, quieter, slower places where something actually happens between people? What kind of arguments are we going to use? Where are we going to look for the data to convince them that perhaps this is the way forward?
I think there is a contradiction in this question that we have to address ourselves, because true, we are driven by figures and attendance. At the same time, our three institutions are not relying on this attendance to survive. I would say, which is exceptional. But that doesn't mean that figures are not important, because the success is not to make money. The attendance and the growth in attendance is also to measure public success. I mean, if people like what we do, they come. If they do not come, it's not that they do not like that we do, but they are less interested. I mean, there is always a contradiction between trying to be open to as many people as possible and to be driven by success.
But are we happy?
Complicated matter.
Because the British example, especially when national museums became free, entrance to national museums became free, was that, and then there are visitor studies always to accompany things, they realized that the profile didn't change. The same people were going then for more often. So, Penelope, yes?
I think it's wrong to say that they became free, because almost all of them
temporary exhibitions or not, yes.
It was more a condition that the government said, we will continue to give you the grant if you meet these criteria. So there was a big drive to try and change the demographic. It hardly changed at all, as you said already. I think the question about sponsorship is complicated, because in fact, you find, especially in museums which have a very big drive for sponsorship, there's an increasingly large number of rich people who want to sponsor niche projects with small numbers of people with interesting educational outcomes. So there are all kinds of sponsors. I don't think that's the question. The sponsors don't necessarily need large numbers. They're also interested in real change with small numbers. I think it's maybe in the middle, when you have a very simplistic evaluation of success by numbers. But actually, we all know that it doesn't mean very much. And similarly, you were talking about qualitative evaluation. And you need to go a very long way for that to mean something, because we all ask, did you like this exhibition? What did you like best? Was the information useful? I mean, these things tell us nothing, really.
Yeah.
So we began, at the Tate, we actually began hiring people to do so-called peer reviews, like in the academic sector, to do something really in-depth, which told us about some in-depth impact for a few people. But I think that quantitative and qualitative evaluations are very hard to use in any intelligent way.
They are. I mean, to be honest, some of the best experience I have had about, I mean, testing the quality of an exhibition are unexpected experience. I mean, this input doesn't come because we have statistics made at the entrance of the exhibition, in the sense that, do you like the show? How much do you like the show? But by the fact that, for example, as happened to us in one of our last exhibitions, when a German professor from Hamburg came with his entire seminar to make on-site seminar 3 days in one of the shows. I mean, the Faculty of Arts of Hamburg. No, I mean, it's like, if you are a writer, I mean, you never know which is the incidence of your poetry, of your writing in the people. I mean, you can know some things, but this is not a kind of exact science. And to be honest, I think that we have been more interested in checking the quality of our offer, even if sometimes we offer things that nobody understands, because we have been able to make a fine balance between research, education, and collection, as Oliver Melle said. And perhaps because it is easier, I mean, to worry about the quality of what we are doing, and not worrying so much about how people think of the things, or how many people are interested in the thing that I are offering.
We have a very specific question once again. I think from your 3 museums, only the Gulbenkian Museum is open now to the public as from today. Manuel and Olivier, your museums are closed.
We are closed.
Yeah?
Yes.
So the question is, even with all the security measures, do you think that people are willing at this moment to go back and visit museums? What is your, I don't know, if you have any feedback? Well, there are these visitor studies that we had access to already from the UK and from US, very much related to how safe, in terms of communication, communicating with the outside world, how safe museums can make people feel. But do you think that in the near future, this is something people will like to do?
I think there will be always a core public that will want to come. It's very difficult to predict. I think the people will come back. The most difficult thing is to predict when and how many of them will come back. I think it's very difficult. At this moment, very difficult. I think many directors in this country are saying that for the next 2 years, we will not see half of our public.
Yeah. Well, it's a difficult question, because it's the question about how essential we are, you know. And it's very well. I mean, you have quoted some of some studies that you have been reading. I was surprised, because I was reading one American study about the post-pandemic museums visits, and of course, one of the factors for people to decide to visit the museums was that those museums offer safety. I mean, no, and hygiene and all these things. But another one was that people are going to go again to the museums if people are going to go again to the museums. I mean, nobody will go to an empty museum, because this is somehow, I mean, unsure, no? I mean, I don't feel sure, no? So there will be a kind of complicated dialectic between going or not going. I mean, people or not people. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, we had a colleague recently here in Portugal who told us, I don't want to go back to a half-empty theater, for instance. Or somebody from Germany, where museums open, to say it was so strange. It seemed like I couldn't breathe. I was in it, there were not many people, but still it was a feeling of, that it catches your breath somehow.
Yeah.
Penelope?
Well, I was, I suppose, not surprised, but a little saddened that in our first hour of being open again, after 2 months, we had 6 visitors. It's not very.
What was your expectation, or had you an expectation?
I was a little bit interested to see whether there might be a queue, but there was no queue.
Okay.
Not like, it's not that essential.
Yeah.
Well, although we've been working hard on the online activities, it seems that all those virtual visits and things that museums were really pushing 6 weeks ago, they've gone down too. So, yeah, I think we need to work maybe a bit harder than we thought we did.
Yeah. Let me ask you one more question that is in my mind a lot. And although we already know that Olivier doesn't want to go back to using a tie, I would like to know, or maybe you do, but you enjoy the time that you don't have to. I'm thinking a lot, there are certain things we all had to stop doing because we were obliged to. This situation obliged us to stop doing certain things. Have you identified anything that, although you were obliged not to do now, you definitely don't want to start doing again in the future, if you could go back to doing it again in the future? Have you thought about it? What don't you want to go back to?
You mean regarding the public or regarding the
your work? Whatever, yeah, your work, what you do every day.
Well, I mean, for me, it's a very simple thing, perhaps, no, but this connection between workplace and work has advantages. This is clear, no? I mean, probably one of the experience that we have to learn from this situation is that probably we people that must to make a certain research, applied research to exhibitions. I mean, not pure research as in the academic level. We should try to have this kind of 3 spaces. No, one space for the hard job of the logistics, so to say, and a second one more concentrated, and perhaps one in complete isolation at the library, making research. And perhaps for this third kind of work, it's better to remain home. I mean, isolated and not to go to the office each day. And well, I mean, as all crisis, for me, it has mean to rethink. I mean, the necessity of rethinking all the routines. I mean, should I go daily the same hour to my office, and or can we organize things in another way? Well, in Spain, we have a very big tradition of presential work. I mean, you are working and you are at the office, and this is going to be changed.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yes, that's a good sign. Thank you, Manuel. Olivier?
Yeah, I think that for me, this is probably the right comment, because in fact, what Manuel said is true. I think that we have to rethink a lot our relationship between the workplace and work. That is, for me, that we will not go back easily to the former way of dealing with that. My second thing is, what I would like to see is what I was mentioning at the beginning about education. I think education was, again, too much linked with the place, and we could do a better job at delivering education about art in a different schedule and in a different place. I mean, not to be so much related to the place and the children or the adults visiting, but to be, to offer this in a very different way. And it will be also very difficult for many education team, because it's a big change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for me, if I add something, I mean,
the wish list is getting bigger. I can see that. Yes, Manuel.
No, just to, I mean, there's something we are developing together with, I mean, the areas of communication and experience and technologies of the foundation, and it's I mean, probably one of the opportunities offered by these strange times of, I mean, 2 months home thinking and working on distance is something like, I mean, to think digitally about the physical and physically about the digital. I mean, we should probably think when we are writing our first text about the show or the introduction to the catalog, or we are thinking about how to present and offer the experience of the exhibition to the people, we should think at the same time that the exhibition will be closed in 3 months later. But if we curate these contents, if we think in these contents digitally, probably we can have 20 minutes superb podcast because we have organized things to I mean, to make an interview with our American guest curator, and and then we can offer a podcast 6 months later. I mean, totally emancipated for the exhibition and as a free content for our audiences, no? And well,
great. Penelope, what's on your wish list?
Well, I think to go back to what Olivier said, breaking routines which have become too complacent and too normal is very good for us. And knowing how much work we now have to do outside the museum with schools, because they can't come to the museum, is certainly good for the thinking about collection, because you develop routines which become too normal, don't they? You go around the collection in the same way. You say, in room 1, look at these 2 things. In room 2, look at these 2 things. And you develop very fixed narratives. And in fact, if you're with different people and there's no narrative, even to walk them around, you begin to think about art in different ways. So I think that the challenge of talking to people about art outside a certain narrative is good, and I think it's good for us, and I hope it means also that the education teams become more embodied in the museum as a whole, because that's a very slow process. You know, I've tried in my time at the Gulbenkian to bring the education team into the museum, so it's part of the overall team and not seen as a separate service. That's something. It's changing, but I think that this could be a help for us to actually think about art outside the museum.
Yes. So we've reached the end of our time, our conversation. I thank you, all 3 of you, very, very much for everything you've shared. And I thank everybody who's followed us through the different media. I would like to finish, perhaps to conclude with 2 comments that just came in. One from Eduardo saying that we should rethink the quality of life and time. And also a comment from Paulo who said, art lovers will always go back to museums since they're not interested in who is there, but what is always there, what they like. So thank you all very much. And thank you also to the Gulbenkian Foundation for inviting me to moderate this conversation. And see you soon, I hope. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you
very much.